What's the best compact SUV? There are more than a dozen models out there, and we tested 6, including perennial bestsellers, our favorites, and the latest redesigns to see which one will edge out the other. And it was close. These are all really good SUVs, just like our last test in 2019, but each one manages to do something that makes you scratch your head.
We brought the Volkswagen Tiguan, winner of our last 2 comparisons of this test, and recently updated for 2022, along with the minimally changed Honda CR-V and Subaru Forester, as well as the redesigned Hyundai Tucson, Mitsubishi Outlander, and Nissan Rogue.
What's missing, and you might be wondering about this, is the Toyota RAV4 and the Ford Escape. We invited them both to attend and they declined.
Let's dig in, see how they did. Let's start from the back of the pack, the Honda CR-V. Now, this didn't come unexpected because the CR-V finished 4th of 7 in our last test, but it's definitely feeling like one of the cars in most need of a redesign here, but it did do a couple things well.
Front seat comfort was quite good. The seats were really well padded. It didn't bother my back to sit there for a long time.
Yeah, and there's a lot of roominess to it too. Honda actually uses probably the effective non-traditional gear selector here. It's console mounted rather than along the center here, so you get a lot of pass-through space. Makes it feel like there's more room than maybe in others that have the larger, wider center console.
So while we're talking about things up front, in-cabin storage, definitely a high mark here.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of cubbies all around, so I'm always looking for places to put all my stuff. There seem to be plenty of spots for that.
Yeah, it's configurable too. So there are multiple trays and levels and dividers, and if you can't fit what you want to bring with in this, it's going in the trunk. There's no other place for it. It's just highly versatile. Yeah,
it's absolutely great. It'll hold large items, small items. There's little bits for everything. My one concern, and this was something I voiced when we compared the CR-V hybrid and RAV4 hybrid, is some of it can be open. And so I'm worried about things, sliding out real quickly if you stomp on the brakes, but just lots of space, really great.
So what drove down the CR-V score? Noise.
Let's talk about that engine. It is incredibly noisy. It is noisy as you're slowly moving your way up to 30 miles an hour. It's noisy on the highway. And when it finally calms down, the road noise starts up. So it's just unpleasant all around.
Yeah, it's not a quiet place to be. There's just no way around it. It's noisy no matter what you're doing.
So the engine noise was one thing, but the engine itself and the transmission was a whole nother category we scored in powertrain. And the CR-V is this interesting mix of good and bad, mostly toward bad. And that's because it is very slow to respond off the line. So we did 0 to 60 testing, measure testing on all of these, and the CR-V was the fastest. Like, if you really want to hold the accelerator down for 8.3 seconds, you're going to get to 60 faster than all of these. But what happens from 0 to 10 and 0 to 30 miles an hour, it is much slower, and you're the back of the pack right off the line. So if you're crossing a street that cross traffic does not stop, you're going to have to think twice about the traffic gap before you go. Another thing that did not score well was ride quality.
There was a stretch of road in our test that was fantastic because the road was really imperfect, and I loved it. I thought that it really illuminated the difference between the cars, and the CR-V was, just didn't handle that very well.
Yeah, its ride firmness is very stiff. I didn't think that overall quality is that bad. Like, when you do hit a bump, it's very well controlled, but the firmness is definitely up there.
Yeah, and firmness has been a trend for this class for a while, and I don't understand why, and it's definitely present here. I want something comfortable. It's a compact SUV, I want to be comfortable. It's not a sports car. It doesn't need to have that firmness.
The CR-V's user interface also didn't score that well. Now, what does that mean? This is how you interact with the car in the multimedia system, and it's much more than just your audio source. These screens now, these control systems, this is how you interact with the car, so we think it's really important that it does it well, and the CR-V did not.
No, absolutely not. And you start with a small screen. It's not the most responsive. It's definitely on the older side of things. And then you move into things like, we've been harping on Honda for years for not having volume and tuning knobs, and they've finally given us a volume knob. There's still no tuning knob. And the problem I have with the volume knob especially is it's located in such a point where I often would just go right to the climate control knob that's right below it. And I'm still doing that, and it's been a week plus of driving this car. It's frustrating.
Yeah, I think the user experience of just the layout and the menus, things are buried deep, and it just hesitates and it's jerky when you're going back and forth between screens. But then you add on touch-sensitive controls, and it just dumps even more. That volume knob is the only mechanical control on the whole user interface.
I think it's important to explain too that generally speaking, we don't care for touch-sensitive controls. They're difficult to use while you're driving. You tend to be focused in the wrong area. You're looking down instead of looking out in front of you.
Up next is the fully redesigned Mitsubishi Outlander. Now, this was redesigned for 2022, shares a lot of its underlying architecture and features with the Nissan Rogue, but finished very differently than the Rogue. What do we like about it? I'd say interior quality off the top of my head.
I think what really stands out about it is the luxurious leather seats with the diamond quilted stitching. It looks really, really great.
Yeah, it does look really great, but that's the thing. It looks really great. You start getting closer and it's maybe not quite up to snuff.
Yeah, the controls are a bit rickety and they don't exactly operate as high quality as you would expect. The gear selector, for example, is notchy, and the buttons feel just a little flimsy when you do use them, but looks nice. I love how that pattern, materials, they stretch to the back seat too on the door panels.
It's one of the few that has wireless CarPlay. It doesn't have Android, but it does have wireless CarPlay. It also, I really appreciated that, you know, the screen had touchable buttons, had easy to use buttons as well as being a touch controls.
Yeah, and that also goes back to the quality a little. It gives you that touch sensitive look, but it doesn't do actual touch sensitive. They're real buttons.
It also does well in multimedia.
It has both USB-C and USB-A ports, which is great, because one of my frustrations driving a ton of cars is knowing which cable I need to bring for which car. And with this, you have a cable, it'll work.
The one standout feature that the Outlander did have was rear climate control. So most of these cars have rear air conditioning, heating, vents, but this actually had a standalone climate control for rear passengers to choose what temperature they wanted, which the Rogue was the only other one to have that, but both are very rare features in this class. The Outlander in this test was the only one with a third row, and you might think, hey, I've got more seats than everyone else. That's an advantage. In our testing though, the third row actually hurt it more than helped.
It really did. The third row is sort of a third row in name only. It's difficult to use. The second row seats ride right up against the back of the bottom seat cushion, so you've got to slide that second row forward in order to make any space for the third row passengers.
And as soon as you do that, second row isn't nearly as roomy as it was before.
You know, whenever you bring this up, people will say, oh, it's only for kids. What kids? I mean, it didn't do well in car seat check scores, and so what kids will fit in the back seat of this?
There are no latch anchors in the third row, and so you'll only be able to use a booster seat back there, which that's fine, but you're talking about bigger kids and they're going to need a little more leg room.
Yeah, and also no tethers on the back, right? No top tethers.
Correct. No top tethers in the third row.
Yeah. So very limited for kids. There might be a window where, okay, for a couple of years you can put your kids back there, but it's very limiting.
And it also limits a window because it kills visibility.
Visibility, when those headrests are on, it's almost totally obstructs the view of the rear window.
Yeah, and you have to fully remove them to get them out of the way and then stow them below the cargo floor.
They don't
You can't
fold.
just fold them down like in other vehicles.
Yeah. Rearward visibility wasn't the only knock against visibility in the Outlander. Front wasn't so great either.
Yeah, the hood is just overly tall. It feels almost like you're driving a heavy-duty pickup more than a compact SUV. And it's weird because it doesn't seem necessary. If you look at it where the windshield ends, there's just a lot of height there that isn't doing anything. There doesn't seem to be a purpose for it.
The Outlander's handling also was a little off. And we had the Rogue here too, but it's a little different. The Outlander is heavier, and you could feel that in how it drove and how it handled. It was just a little slower to react, and it just felt heavier. And you guys were a little harsh on the ride too.
Yeah, I think we were a little kinder on the handling, but the ride, again, just overly firm, beats you up with every road imperfection, and you just really, really feel it.
Agreed, it's really exhausting, I think, for the driver.
I was harsh on both. I didn't think it rode that well either. It's interesting because I thought it was somewhat soft, but it was just uncontrolled. You would hit a bump and you just feel the whole wheel and suspension move around, and the whole car moved around too. So it was just, it was sloppy. Up next is the Tiguan. What happened? So 2022, it got a couple updates, but it has had a pretty hard fall from winning our two previous comparisons to where it placed in this one. There's still a lot to like about the Tiguan though, specifically how it handles and how fun to drive it is. I think it's one of the most proficient handling vehicles of what we tested.
Agreed, it makes easy work of twisty roads and sharp corners. It was a lot of fun to really take those at a good clip.
Yeah, and the powertrain actually has some of the best responsiveness once you're moving, I felt, so that really helps you power out of those corners. And that's also, I think, handling is where the large 20-inch wheels and real firmness in the ride really pay off.
We also scored it really high in car seat checks.
We did. So the Tiguan is very roomy, especially in the back seat, and it easily handled those giant rear-facing car seats that often take up a lot of space back there.
Yeah, I thought the back seat was really roomy. Even though it had a pretty high floor hump back there, it was narrow and you could kind of position yourself in between it. And I thought that front roominess, it was just a big. It just feels big and open. So what's changed for 2022 that tanked the Tiguan score?
It's the controls. The steering wheel now is mostly touch sensitive. It's a weird mix of touch sensitive, and we sort of compared it to like video game controllers where everything moves on an axis, but it's just clunky, it's clumsy. I turned on the heated steering wheel trying to go around a corner. It's just unnecessary. I want buttons back.
In addition to the new steering wheel controls, there are also new climate controls that are touch sensitive, and I want those real controls back. I don't want to guess. I don't want to have to get used to it and learn it. But not everyone felt the same.
I'm fine with them. I actually thought they worked okay. There are these little ridges that allow you to sort of feel your way to, where you need to be if you're adjusting the heat, for instance, without looking down at them for too long. So for me, they weren't that bad.
To me, they weren't as egregious as the wheel controls, but I want my physical controls back.
I think another thing that really stood out is the powertrain. We talked about some good things about it. But what really got to me was just the hesitation from a stop. We were trying to scoot across a 4-lane highway, and doing so really got my heart pounding.
Yeah, this might have been something that's changed because I don't recall this characteristic in the Tiguan in previous tests, and it does feel new. The Tiguan was by far the slowest in every measure testing category. Off the line, 0 to 10, 20, 60, it was just back of the pack the whole way. What also changed for 2022 is the value score isn't as strong as it used to be because there's a shorter warranty than when we tested it in 2019. Volkswagen took back its long warranty, and now the powertrain, the expensive stuff, doesn't have as good of coverage as the rest of the cars. And there are cars here that have a very stout powertrain warranty. Also, fuel economy, even though it's slightly better than it was before, it's the lowest in the test. Next up is the Forester, and it still places really well. It placed second in our last comparison, so a little bit of movement here, but it still does a lot of things well across the board, except for that one thing that it does really poorly. But let's start with what we like about it, visibility.
The Forester has this great, it's like driving a greenhouse. The windows are giant, the sight lines are fantastic. You really notice it in comparison with the other cars.
Yeah, my one small knock on it is the roof-mounted seat belt for the second row, but besides that, love it.
It's kind of the sleeper in interior quality. You wouldn't expect the Subaru to really wow you, but our top touring trim has a really nice interior.
It does, and what really impressed me besides just the quality is that you found that quality when you went back to the back seat. You find sometimes in a lot of these SUVs that, you know, the second row, the materials start to dip and they're just not quite as good. But here, front to back.
One of my favorite things was the seat back pockets in the second row, which sounds like such a small thing, but there are 3 pockets there. And as a mom, I always am looking for as many places to put the kids' stuff as possible.
I really liked the way that it rode. I mean, there's a lot of questionable ride quality happening in this class, but we all agreed that this was one of the nicest to drive.
It's plush, and kudos to Subaru for giving us a car with 18s.
18s.
18-inch wheels, let's be clear.
Yeah.
Everything else in the test had either 19-inch wheels or the Tiguan had 20s, and there's just no reason for it. This gives you really good cushioning, just really comfortable ride, highway speeds, lower speeds, just plush.
All right, so on to what we don't like. What's that one thing?
It is the engine noise. I was already complaining about the CR-V. I still think that's the worst, but the Subaru is just kissing it. It's so close, it's so loud.
It's grating, it's droning, it's everywhere.
Yeah, I found it road noise, wind noise. It's a shame because it rides so nicely. I want to drive it more, but what's really keeping me from wanting to take this on a road trip or something was just how gravelly the car sounded. Now, while the Subaru does have traditional controls and buttons and none of the touch-sensitive controls that we don't like, its user interface wasn't completely flawless.
No, it has some issues. The screen is very small. It's the older system. Subaru has updated in other models to a new system, but this is the old one. Small touchscreen, confusing physical controls on the wheel and below the menu, a strange little secondary screen that sits up on the dash, and for me, driving, a lot of times I found it getting washed out in direct sunlight, which just made it harder to try to use any of the nice physical controls.
The Forester also didn't do that well in our cargo testing. It lacked some features and space compared with competitors. So the 2022 Hyundai Tucson, redesigned this year, significantly updated, and the previous Tucson finished really well in our last test. It was third, and that was an older car at the time. That update is here, and it did well in our test. Front seat comfort was a standout feature here. We all marked it high. I really liked head restraints that were just pillowy soft. Like, you know, I was just driving an S-Class a couple weeks ago. Like, that head restraint felt like an S-Class. There was also heated and ventilated seats. There was a front passenger seat with equal power adjustments as the driver's seat, and that's not a given in this class. So there's one thing that we all talked about, but we don't score it. We don't score styling. It's just eye of the beholder, but we all thought the styling on the interior was super interesting.
Yeah, it's a really beautiful design. It's very forward thinking, right? You get into this car and you're like, this is a modern car. This feels of the moment.
Yeah, all the lines flow really well. All the controls are really well integrated into it. I wish the quality lived up to the design, because we score that, and that would have been nice. But it does look like a nice modern car.
Yeah, I thought how the memory seat function kind of flows with the arch of the interior, and then how the vents are also integrated into the styling. It was just super cool. Now back to things we do score, and ride quality, which scored high. But we didn't all give the same marks there. We kind of disagreed a little bit on the ride quality.
I didn't find it the worst in the test, but it was a little bit harsher to me. I think I just felt the vibrations and some of the road noise more coming into the cabin and going through my body, whereas in other cars, it just seemed to upset the car.
Yeah, I thought it was really, it was really apparent just how quiet that cabin was. You didn't hear a lot of engine noise. I didn't hear a lot of or experience a lot of road noise. So overall, it was really great.
Because noise, next up, that's where it scored really high too. It was, it rode a little firmer than the Forester, but it didn't have the howling wind noise that the Forester has, and it was my favorite ride of the day. So this car performed strong in our acceleration testing. It was one of the quickest off the line, the 0 to 10, 20, 30. This really got moving quickly, especially when there's such a stark difference between this car and the CVT equipped cars. This has an 8-speed automatic transmission, but there was some goofiness happening.
Yeah, I honestly, at the start of driving it, I did kind of think it had a CVT for a second, because there was some weird hesitation right around 2,000 RPM. And even in normal driving modes, it sometimes would seem to almost hold RPM longer before it would decide to upshift.
One of the things that are new for 2022 on this top trim level are multimedia and climate controls that are entirely touch sensitive. Now, they didn't score as badly as I expected it to, but what stood out there?
What really struck me about the touch sensitive buttons was I just couldn't get the climate to adjust. And I was, of course, traveling along, and I looked up and realized just how far I had moved. It made me a little nervous. So, of course, I stopped and dealt with it, and as you should, right? But you shouldn't be in a car where, changing something as simple as the climate controls is so difficult that it requires you to look away for that long.
There was some redemption, though, with the user experience of the menu was great. The instrument panel was all digital, really easy to use. It didn't have the goofy controls on the steering wheel like the Tiguan has, but there were some other things that still bothered us a little bit.
Yep, and for me, that was the gear selector. Hyundai went to a push-button gear selector, saves no space, and then the controls beyond it just don't seem to be pointing at the driver. Like, I had to crane my neck just to make sure I was hitting the right button, and I don't understand it.
In a negative way, I was unhappy with the rear seats. The cup holders were a little small. I couldn't get my bottle holder to fit. The bottle holders in the side doors were also kind of small, and I had to really shove that bottle to get it in there. Also, the seat back pockets are mesh, and it's a stretchy mesh, but I'm not sure that actually works when you're talking about figurines and all the little things that kids bring with them.
So the Nissan Rogue, redesigned for 2021, and I'd say they did a pretty good job, because in our last test in 2019, the Rogue was last. And now, here we are, the Rogue is first. One of the things that really stood out was interior quality. What's so great about it?
It's really luxurious in there. Same diamond quilted seats as the Outlander, but it just seems a touch better, perhaps. There's also some really nice padding throughout the cabin, which I think really helps too.
And you get some extra little interior features, particularly in the second row, that you don't get in the Outlander, like rear sunshades, that are just, that's a luxury touch, and this is a compact SUV.
The Rogue that we tested is the top platinum trim level at $39,000, and it was the most expensive of this test. But all of the cars were the top trim levels in this test. Now, the Outlander wasn't equipped with every option package, but we're really looking at the top trims of all of these cars. So our scores are very much the cars that we tested, and not the Rogue as a whole or the Forester as a whole, but what we have in front of us. And what the Rogue gave us were test exclusive features.
One of our favorites was the head-up display. It was only in the Rogue. It basically just projects really useful, limited information right in front of you as you're driving. And it just, I don't know, it just makes life a lot easier.
It works with polarized sunglasses. That's not a given. There are not many head-up displays that work with polarized sunglasses. This one does, and it was great. And like the Outlander, the whole user interface is just normalized.
Yeah, so you get those touch-sensitive look buttons that are actually real buttons. You get a nice large touchscreen, you get a great digital IP. My one preference for the Outlander over the Rogue is the volume and tuning knobs are a little bit larger, but that's so minor.
Yeah, the multimedia offering, so the USB inputs, like the Outlander, you have a USB Type A and a USB Type C, which right now, that's just the way to go, where everything isn't the same standard. You need both options, so you don't have to order little adapters or different cables. It makes it painless to integrate, your device with this car.
Yeah, and unlike the Outlander, which also does that with the USBs, you get an even more useful center console. You get that large pass-through we already mentioned. Jenny can talk about that a little more, but you get useful storage instead of just smooth surfaces that just look nice and don't serve any real purpose.
So it's just a place to put your purse, which I think a lot of women want. And I don't want to put my expensive purse on the floor. Who does? So let's keep it clean. Let's just throw it in that little space.
In the back of the Rogue, there is a surprise and delight feature.
Yep, like we already mentioned in the Outlander, rear climate controls. Most of these you just get vents. Here, like in the Outlander, you can actually control the temperature.
The Rogue treats the second row seat like first-class citizens, and I think that's what helps it stand out.
Yeah. So what didn't we like about the Rogue? Basically, how it drove. There were some similarities between the Outlander and the Rogue here. For me, I thought the brake pedal just required too much pressure to get the stopping power that I wanted, and then the ride quality similarly just felt soft and uncontrolled. But I know you guys had some different experiences there.
I really didn't notice any issues with the braking. I thought it was fine, and it could be that it weighs less than the Outlander, and that's the difference there. As far as the ride quality, what did you think?
I also didn't really notice too much of an issue with braking, and like Jenny said, the Rogue is a bit lighter than the Outlander, which I think helps it some in handling and ride quality. It is still too firm for my liking, but it wasn't the most glaring in this test.
Overall, the Rogue didn't lose any categories. It did really well in a lot, and these complaints about how it drove really weren't enough to make it score any lower than first place. In Cars.com's history of multi-car comparisons, this was one of our closest tests. The point spread between last place and first place really wasn't that much at all, and it shows just how good these SUVs are. So you really have to look at the results through the lens of, well, what's most important to me? Now, we obviously have our own scoring and categories and feel that the Rogue won this one, but if backseat room or interior quality or car seat fitment is more important to you, then go find the car that scored the highest in those categories. And you can find that at Cars.com/news.